And I'm the director of the Center for Canadian Studies and a professor here at Johns Hopkins SAIS. C'est un grand plaisir pour moi de vous souhaiter bienvenue ici à l'Université Johns Hopkins et notre centre d'études canadien. Our speaker today, Andrew Leslie, is giving what for us is the major event of our academic year, the Thomas O. Enders Memorial Lecture. Tom Enders was President Carter's ambassador to Canada, served as Assistant Secretary of State for Latin America, and was devoted to keeping the Canada-U.S. relationship strong. He served at a time when the current Prime Minister's father was Prime Minister of Canada. And I will say that so far, comparing father and son, the father had a bumpier ride with American presidents than so far Justin Trudeau has had. I think that's largely due to the hard work of people like our speaker today. I also want to thank, at the outset, the Association for Canadian Studies in the United States and the Enders Family Endowment, which have helped to keep this lecture going and are providing support for us today. With that, I would like to turn to another great friend of our program and of our center and of our school, Mr. Dennis Stevens. Dennis is the Deputy Head of Mission at the Canadian Embassy here in Washington. He has served on the Privy Council office staff. He has been a diplomat, and I first met him when he was Consul General in Seattle when I was out on the West Coast as well. Dennis will introduce our speaker. What will happen then, we'll hear the lecture, we'll adjourn to Q&A. You should all have little white cards to jot your questions down on, and we'll collect them and ask the questions going back and forth in a Q&A session. We'll adjourn to lunch, which is in the next room. With that, let me turn it to you, Dennis.
Thanks very much, Chris. And I just like to say thank you to Chris for all the work he does to contribute to the Canada-U.S. relationship, not just to celebrate it, but to contribute his own ideas and bring together people who want to keep injecting new energy into this mutually beneficial relationship. Since the U.S. election last November, the government of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has been pursuing a vigorous whole-of-Canada approach to engaging the new administration, the new Congress, and state governments and communities all across America. This is an effort that's involved the Prime Minister himself, his ministers, numerous provincial premiers, and members of Parliament from all political parties. So really a whole-of-Canada, a real Team Canada effort. And at the forefront of that engagement effort has been your speaker today, Andrew Leslie, who in January was appointed by the Prime Minister as Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs with a focus on Canada-U.S. relations. Parliamentary Secretary Leslie was elected to Parliament in 2015 to represent the Ottawa area riding of Orleans. Prior to that, he served in the Canadian Armed Forces for 35 years, retiring as Lieutenant General, or as we say back home, Lieutenant General, in 2011. He served on numerous international missions, including leading troops in Germany, Cyprus, the former Yugoslavia, and most recently Afghanistan. Parliamentary Secretary Leslie, along with Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland, is now responsible for Canada's most important relationship, that with the United States. Our two countries have built one of the closest, most mutually beneficial relationships in the world. And it's a partnership that's essential to both countries, to our shared prosperity and our shared security. And it couldn't be in any better hands than it is with your speaker today, Parliamentary Secretary Andrew Leslie, whom I'd ask you to welcome to the podium. Thank you.
Responsibility is an interesting term, isn't it? First and foremost, I'm delighted to be here, and I want to thank you, Professor, and the Center for Canadian Studies at Johns Hopkins for your hospitality and the opportunity to come and speak to you. And I'm thrilled to give the 1617 Thomas Enders Memorial Lecture. There's a long history of this. I took the opportunity to research it, and I'm truly blessed to be amongst some of the intellectual giants who preceded me. So I'm going to lower your expectations right now. We're good. The Canadian Studies program here and at other universities around the world form a key part of educating, informing, and helping shape essentially the thoughts and intents and passions of a whole host of academics. And of course, the research that it produces is invaluable, not only to getting Canada out in the world, but helping Canada be better understood by our friends, allies, and those who may wish to do business with it. Economically, commercially, culturally, and politically, as North American neighbors, we here in the United States, with our closest friend and ally, of course, are uniquely connected. And I believe that this magnificent institution is literally a linchpin in that relationship. And the graduates have gone on to do amazing things to further the better interests of both our nations. A center like this one that cultivates the next generation of leaders, and I had a quick opportunity to meet a bunch of you, both from north and south of the border, is invaluable, and I'd like to commend Professor Sands for the good work that he's done in keeping this institution thriving. So, sir, thank you, and thank you for the invitation. So, ladies and gentlemen, interns who are either ladies and gentlemen, but are come from Canada, you may not know. If I could just get the interns to stand up for a sec. So young students who come from north of the border down here to learn and study and work hard and will eventually return much smarter and wiser than they were before, hopefully. Yes? We're good. So let's talk about the issue at hand, which is Canada and the US. We, as you know, have one of the closest and most intertwined of economies. There are over 400,000 people who cross that border daily, both ways. And it's for business, it's for pleasure. They are there crossing a relatively thin border, which permits the free flow of trade of goods and people. And of course, in the cybersphere, on the internet, on the web, very few of us actually know the volume of information, the value of the exchange. And it's something that, quite frankly, has allowed us, all of us, to prosper. We have been and will continue to be trading partners. We have been tied by bonds of blood. In my own case, and I'm not atypical, I'd say a good third of my family are American. A couple of generations ago, for a whole variety of political reasons, which involved United Kingdom, Great Britain, the King and Queen. Anyways, we won't go into that right now. Didn't end particularly well for that side of the family. They went south. I have many American friends because I was a soldier, as mentioned, for 35 years. And there are literally hundreds of thousands just like me. We have Canadians who are marrying Americans. If the recently engaged couple would care to identify themselves. Thank you. And it's my hope that they'll spend at least half their lives in one country or the other, even though they just got back from Asia. I have had the privilege of working alongside, leading, or being led by American soldiers and commanders. I have seen American helicopters thump themselves down on a hot pickup zone to pick up wounded Canadians and take them to a hospital that was run by Canadians and American surgeons working with them in Kandahar to be shipped out to recovery centers in Landstuhl, Germany, which is run by the Americans on American transport aircraft, to be then transported further on Canadian aircraft to the North American continent. I have seen Canadian gunners, of which I used to be one, firing American guns that were essentially loaned to us on a handshake and then we bought once we used them for a while, firing in support of American battle groups just south of Kandahar that were under the command of a tough young Canadian one-star general. And I've also seen Canadian tanks, Leopard 2s, 65-ton monsters, giving direct fire support to American infantry while they were doing the business late at night in towns such as Singin, Sagin. So those relationships exist, they're real. And it's actually a remarkable institution of nations that we have managed to build amongst ourselves. We're bound by proximity, we're linked economically, and we're connected through history. And it's on these issues that we've thrived, we've built, we've developed. On matters of trade, on energy and the environment, on border management and continental defense, which I can talk for some time if you so choose, and international security, amongst many others, America and Canada have often collaborated and found a way to reach a suitable compromise in our different points of view. We've managed to achieve consensus. Have we always agreed? Of course not. Of course not. But those issues have been resolved through discussion, through better understanding, through academics, through facts, and really through that personal face-to-face contact, which is so important for any sort of discourse involving things which are complicated. And our relationship is at the same time simple and at other times complicated. One thing that stands out in our relationship is I believe both our nations have the same essential aspirations for the peoples that comprise them. We seek, in our case and yours, to help those who are willing to work hard, who need a hand, who aspire to join the middle class, who are part of the middle class and taking care of their families, setting them up for success, getting the resources they need to put their kids through school, buy a house, and send their offspring to a whole bunch of summer camps and anything else that is within reason and affordable. And to do that, we've got to have jobs for our people. We have to have that fair and free exchange of goods, either within our nations or, of course, across that thin border. Jobs in agriculture, manufacturing, tourism, mining, oil, gas, forestry, the list goes on and on and on forever, to the extent that our economies are so intertwined, so intermingled, that our production systems, the value-added chain, are such that trying to take them apart could actually be unviable, not viable. Certainly not efficient or effective. Let me explain. There's 9 million jobs on both sides of our border that directly depend on this free flow of peoples and ideas and goods. 9 million. And there's more in terms of the ripple effect, the value generation that exists. There are over 500,000 Americans who work for Canadian businesses that are active in the United States. And the jobs are the same in Canada. And every state and every conditional district has some Canadian businesses that provide the opportunity for Americans to earn a living. In terms of TransCanada, for example, talking about pipelines earlier on today and some of the students, there are a third of the employees are Americans, and they work out of almost 40 of your states. One of our biggest banks, for example, Toronto Dominion, employs 26,000 Americans across your magnificent country. Oh, and by the way, 48 of states count Canada as amongst its top 3 customers. So let's use Virginia as an example. In 2016, $4.9 billion worth of goods were traded between Virginia and Canada. More than half of that, just under $3 billion, represents goods that Canada imported. So just bear with me for a sec while I stop and absorb that message. So the state of Virginia's greatest customer is Canada. Canada imported more from Virginia than the other way around. And we are your biggest customer as a nation. And that relationship is certainly based on the business adage of you should listen carefully to your customer, is one worthy of consideration. Now, the exact opposite is true. It's even more in favor of the United States. We are customers and clients and friends of each other. You can also look at it another way. 280,000 jobs in Virginia depend on trade and investment with Canada, which is a staggering number. People who can put food on their tables and go through that value chain which I've referred to earlier. And we have the numbers for each one of the states, for each one of the congressional districts, what the trade and the major imports and exports are. It's all publicly available information. It all points to that web of interconnectivity, which has resulted, quite frankly, in a magnificent growth rate in our two economies. It's a model for the rest of the world. And quite frankly, in my opinion, we should be aiming to keep it that way. For Canada, it was reassuring to hear that President Trump does not intend to immediately terminate NAFTA, and that instead Canada, American, and Mexican representatives will seek to renegotiate it, to tweak it, essentially, which the President's already referred to. Canada is, of course, open to that step, and we want to work together with the United States and Mexico to improve NAFTA, of course, to ways that better us all. But, and this is important, regardless of the outcome of those negotiations, tearing up the agreement is, in my opinion, not the answer. Since 1993, trade with NAFTA has nearly quadrupled, which is an incredible achievement, from just under $300 billion 24 years ago to about $1 trillion last year. No trade agreement that we're aware of in the world has achieved broader and deeper market integration and growth on such a huge scale. So to suggest that NAFTA has been unfair to the United States is to ignore all the good that has come of it. Senator John McCain has said that a NAFTA withdrawal would devastate the economy in Arizona. And his good colleague and friend, Ben Sasson, has said that it would hurt American families at the checkout and would cripple American producers in the field and the offices. In both houses of government, on both sides of the aisle, north and south of the border, there's a deep understanding there is no good that would come from replacing perceived impediments to Canada-U.S. trade with real ones. And we'll talk about border and thick and thin in a couple of secs. Not for two countries, by the way, that have so dependent on one another and created value added, quite frankly, to the envy of most of the rest of the world. Another example is you, the Americans, have imported 92% of our energy exports for a total value of over $40 billion just last year, with crude oil accounting for 2/3 of that. So what does that provide to the American citizens? It provides cheap, secure, reliable, in the sense that you know it's going to be delivered, and competitive energy to boost what we think is going to be the start of another American boom. And of course, it's not only crude, it's hydrocarbons, variety of nature, petroleum products, oils, waxes, and the list goes on. We're also collaborating in other areas on energy innovation, particularly in clean energy. We believe that the economy and the environment can go hand in hand. We believe that by making sound investments now quite significant, over $10 billion over the next short years in green technologies, we'll be at literally the cutting edge of those green technologies, which will enhance efficiency and effectiveness and serve all our interests, especially those of our descendants. So in total, our bilateral trade is somewhere in the $635 to $40 billion. And per day, there's $2.4 billion that crosses actually surprisingly few transit points between an enormous, essentially undefended border which exceeds 5,000 miles. Another example, it's kind of a fun one. Who here likes hamburgers? You're not getting one for lunch. You're getting boxed lunches, though. I'm quite intrigued by that. It reminds me of being a soldier again, so thank you. So beef from Alberta, where I lived for 9 years, very tasty. Wait now, the cows, though, were sold to Nebraska where they were raised, processed at the pristine and absolutely brilliant and new processing centers in Colorado, on a bun that was baked at some of the massive factories in California, using flour, shipped on American rail from Saskatchewan, garnished with lettuce from Arizona. I think I made that one up, to be honest, but I'm not sure. It's lettuce from the United States, but definitely tomatoes from Ontario. You bought that for what, $5? So think of the complexity of that. Think of the decades it took for the various elements to reach their peak efficiency in what they were doing best into an integrated supply chain, which results in a hamburger being delivered to your plate for you to enjoy. How do you untangle that? How do you do that and retain the value added that has grown up over the last 30, 40, 50 years? And that was a simple example. Let's talk about some specifics. Want to talk about milk? Dairy? Well, I do. After Mexico, Canada is the second largest export market for U.S. dairy products, and those exports continue to increase. A fact, Canada-U.S. dairy trade largely favors the United States by a margin of almost 5-1. I'm going to say that again. Canada-U.S. dairy trade largely favors the United States by a margin of almost 5-1. In 2016, we imported $558 million worth of dairy products from the U.S. and exported $112 million. We have a managed supply system. Years ago, we took some pain and reduced the number of producers. And the United States has a direct subsidy system. And the margin in the United States' favor is 5-1. Milk is sometimes transported in wooden crates, so let's talk about wood, specifically softwood. Prime ministers and presidents, from Pierre Trudeau to Ronald Reagan to our Prime Minister Mulroney to your President Bush's 1 and 2, from Chrétien Clinton, from President Obama to Prime Minister Harper, they've all at one time or another grappled with this issue of softwood trade across the border. Of course, these two elements, the two that I've just talked about, dairy and lumber, make between 1.9 to 2% of our entire trading relationship. And in these two cases, both dairy and softwood lumber are not part of NAFTA. I'm going to say that again. They are not part of NAFTA. They're both managed markets. So this latest dispute on softwood lumber, by the way, it's actually known as Lumber 5 because we've gone through this 4 times in the past. So on the previous 4 occasions, countervailing duties have been assigned by the United States against the Canadian export, in their point of view, the imports of lumber. And after a whole bunch of money has been spent on legal bills, and a whole bunch of staff process has ensued, and years have gone by, international bodies have come out and said, you know what, those countervailing duties are not actual fact-based. and the decision of the United States, which was taken by themselves unilaterally in assigning those countervailing duties, has been overturned. We are confident that the material circumstances have not changed. We have every expectation that this process will ensue over the next couple of years, and that independent authorities will come in, take a look at the situation, which is what you want an arbitrator to do, and make a decision in our favor. In the interim, the danger is that people's jobs will be lost, and the United States imports 10% of its lumber needs from Canada. Quite frankly, in my opinion, the United States is entering what might well be the start of a housing boom as your economy picks up in speed and that magnificent American energy and enthusiasm comes to the fore. You're going to need some wood. We're right next door. So by assigning a countervailing duty, it's logical to assume that the price of those wood, plural, guess what's going to happen to it? It's going to go up, which means that the American taxpayer, the middle-class homeowner seeking to either increase their home or to move into a new one, will pay more for their house. Is that how you help the middle class? No two countries share a broader relationship. Have there been disputes? Have there been issues of friction between us in the past? Of course there have been. Will there be in the future? Yes. We going to solve them together? You betcha. Fact-based, calm, discussions between friends, gathering the data and information to make sure that both our economies thrive is what will lead to continued success. In terms of our borders, we've got robust measures, both our countries, in place to keep the border safe and to allow it not to get thicker. Let's thicken the outer perimeter around our two countries at the international limits. But let's not hinder the flow of goods and services across a remarkable, essentially, fence, which is in the main protected by the links and friendships we have between our two nations. This will enhance efficiency and effectiveness and allow us to get even more, if you would, more goods across our one border in the least amount of time so that you can mitigate against the transport costs and the delays that ensue when you have these choke points or when you have a whole bunch of people trying to apply countervailing duties or regulations, and the list goes on. In our case, we have over 65 uniformed and armed Canadian Border Services officers working at about 1,200 discrete points, and your Secretary of Homeland Defense was just up having a great meetings with his equivalent in Canada, Minister Goodale and others, and we're well on our way to coming up with some innovative ideas together as a team to make the border even better than that which it was a short while ago. There's a cross-border forum. Some of you are involved in that and some of the research. There's integrated border enforcement teams, which are actually a really good idea. We have the two countries' border officers working together. And of course, you compound that by thinking of the outer perimeter, and you've got NORAD, an institution which I'm not an expert in because I was an Army guy, but it has been a remarkable success story. I think NORAD does have a future as it expands its scope and you have to worry about increasing levels of threat from new types of weapon systems, but it has worked remarkably well, led by an American 4-star with a Canadian 3-star deputy. We are indispensable allies of the United States. As part of the global coalition against Daesh, virulent organization, which I spent a bit of my adult life fighting, we share the same ethos in terms of degrading them, containing. We have troops who are currently in Eastern Europe We have troops who are currently in Iraq. We have troops who are training missions in Africa. We have another mission that will be announced in due course. And we have troops in Poland, deterring Russian aggression. And of course, we contribute to NATO. We are and have been with you hand in step for literally 80 to 90 years. And that's not going to change. And I've already referred to some brief experiences of my own in my military career, which is unique, by the way. No other two nations that I'm aware of actually enjoy that commonality, that training, and the friendship. I have spent, I don't know how much time in Fort Irwin, Fort Bliss, Fort Grayling, and the list goes on. It's been a privilege to grow up with American soldiers, some of whom have now done very well for themselves, both in and out of uniform. And I think their understanding of Canada is remarkable. So we're bound by proximity, we're linked economically, we're connected through history, and we're friends. We're neighbors, and we look forward to continuing that relationship. And I think now, for me, the most interesting part of this session is about to start, and that's your questions. And Professor Sands, thank to you and your team for all you've done. Thank you.
You can bring the water if you want. We'll sit you down.
Thank you.
Sure. So at the very beginning, I sent around some white cards. So if you have questions and you can just send them up, that would be great. Star, if you see any looking around, our great Starlee, who's our administrative professional in the Center for Canadian Studies, might be able to fetch those for me. But I'm going to ask you the first question since I get to be sitting here. You were elected in 2015 with that great wave of optimism and enthusiasm that came with the beginning of the Trudeau government. And a lot of people here paid attention to that, were caught up in it. And you joined cabinet shortly after our election in the United States. How do you think Canadians have viewed the transition in the United States in terms of the Canada-US relationship? What are they thinking of as the significant changes, and what are they concerned about that now becomes, I guess, part of your portfolio?
Historically, the Northern Canadian beaver has always paid a great deal of attention to what the American elephant is up to. And I mean that with all due respect, and it gives an idea of the relative size. So we tend to focus an awful lot more on our good friends in the United States than the average American focuses on us. It's natural. So we watch very closely what is happening here in Washington and elsewhere. We watch and work at trying to better understand that which are the major pressures and points of focus which may exist amongst any of the elected officials. We are waiting and working very hard to make sure that our lines of communication are not only open, but are crystal clear. And so since the beginning, the Prime Minister has instituted a policy of all of us reaching out to American friends or making new ones. And I think it's been a very good, very gentle campaign of reconnection. Because I'm not saying Canada has ever done this, but you can sometimes take relationships for granted. We didn't do that, but we haven't put as much energy into this relationship as we have done over the last 5 or 6 months. And the President and the Prime Minister, and I had the privilege to be with them when they met at the White House with a very small teams each. And they're both after the same thing. They're both after taking care of the middle class. They're both after reinstituting policies which will better serve those who are trying to join the middle class. Obviously, there's difference in certain political philosophies, but I don't see any of the differences as irreconcilable. And the personal connections between the senior members in the White House of the new team, specifically in cabinet or elsewhere, are actually quite remarkable. Quite remarkable.
When we're working in Canada-U.S. relations, one of the key roles and the role that Tom Enders played for a time in the relationship is the U.S. ambassador in Ottawa. And we don't have an ambassador now. Nominees moving through process, I suppose. How does the absence of a U.S. ambassador in Ottawa affect managing Canada-U.S. relations? Does it mean you're down here much more often? Is the communication line effective beyond, obviously, the President and Prime Minister, just with other parts of the government?
In my opinion, the U.S. ambassador to Canada is primus inter pares amongst the ambassadorial community inside Ottawa, of course. I've watched closely now 7 or 8 ambassadors as they've been appointed and actually served out their tenures, and all of them have done a great job. And there has never been any doubt that whoever is chosen as ambassador to Canada has a relationship with the president, which is usually very strong. By the way, that serves the interests of the United States and of Canada, because if there is an issue, it can be solved literally by the ambassador picking up a phone, going to your Secretary of State very quickly, if at all, and then right to the president. And that's extraordinarily valuable. Your chargé d'affaires, Elizabeth, is doing a magnificent job, very competent, very dedicated professional, and she is maintaining that strong presence of the United States in Ottawa. Yes, it's been a bit of a delay. Having said that, this is not unique. We've actually gone 7 or 8 or 9 months without an ambassador until such was selected and appointed. So I won't say we're used to it, but it's there.
Mm-hmm. You talked about the economic relationship, and it seems as though the Canada-U.S. agenda has been really rocked by the need to renegotiate NAFTA, which the Trudeau government's accepted and is willing to at least talk about, but also a number of trade disputes, and you mentioned several of them in your remarks. How do we keep our focus on trade issues without letting them get out of control? I mean, most of the trade relationship is fine. It's just these parameters and a few disputes. They're not the majority of our economic relationship. How do we keep our eye on the ball in that relationship economically without denigrating what's going well?
The relationship is so complex, and there's so many trade issues that are always at play. I'm going to speak about what we're doing, and essentially, well, let's talk about NAFTA. So NAFTA has been tweaked 11 times so far since its inception. Is it time for another retweak? Sure, of course it is. If one or more of the partners feel that there's some issues that deserve, we have to talk about, let's talk about it. Mm-hmm. Let's have a fact-based discussion to lead to better optimal solutions for all the parties concerned. That's a win-win-win.
Makes sense.
Our approach has been to, as it is for all such issues, we stay focused, we gather our information, we consult with the stakeholders, in our case north of the border. We make sure that our lines of communication are open and crystal clear in terms of getting messages back and forth. There's nothing lost in the nuancing with those with whom we're about to start the detailed negotiations. And using a British saying, we keep calm and carry on.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Talk a little bit about border security. We, under President Obama and then Prime Minister Harper, we established a Beyond the Border working group that engaged in a number of pilot projects, taking a look at different aspects of how our border could be made to work better. When the Trudeau government came in, Beyond the Border working groups were maintained. What's your sense of the importance of the border, and that we continue in some of these efforts to try to find ways to make the border work better? I know you spoke about it a bit in your speech, but are there some priorities or some standout issues you're concerned about?
Well, I was at a luncheon where the President and the Prime Minister had a substantive and quite lengthy discussion about this whole issue of how to keep the border thin and how to expedite stuff across the border both ways, and how to get more people moving more freely back and forth while maintaining security. And this idea of not a more robust, but a more focused and sophisticated outer perimeter was actually a really good exchange between the two of them. By the way, when you've got a president and a prime minister engaged in such a discussion, it's everyone else's role to shut up, just to be clear, because they are communicating. They're actually establishing bonds. They're engaging in substantive to's and fro's. They both bring good points to the discussion and the debate. And at the end of it, just trying to figure out what I'm allowed to say. Anyways, at the end of it, the Prime Minister turned to our equivalent of your Secretary of Homeland Defense and said ABC, and the President was doing the same thing to General Kelly. So it was pretty good. I think we're well on our way. I think we're well on our way not only to maintaining the philosophy of that border, but to enhancing the outer perimeter security.
And we'll see the Gordie Howe International Crossing completed soon?
We hope so. I'll tell you why. Because a staggering proportion of the stuff that we buy from you and that you buy from us goes through this incredibly narrow and, quite frankly, vulnerable conduit. As a soldier, I was once a young one-star general responsible for the Army in Ontario, and that bridge was an issue in terms of security. It's not a military responsibility until things go really pear-shaped. Pear-shaped is Army talk for not good. But it was actually amazing what a short period of concrete, or short space involving a whole bunch of concrete and trusses, and the value that goes over that was. So the more bridges we have, the better. And the newer bridges we have, the better, because they're going to be wider. So yes, let's get it done right away, please.
Let me ask you about another initiative from the previous government that was also launched in 2011, the Regulatory Cooperation Council. Great work was done to try to get regulations of a lot of products in the economy to align, and it was incremental. There's a lot of work still to be done. Does the government in Canada remain committed to this? And do you see a potential with the Trump administration, which has talked about slashing regulations and cutting red tape, particularly for small and medium-sized enterprises, to sort of marry that desire with regulatory alignment in a way that works for both countries?
As soon as the President put that out, that got a whole bunch of attention in Canada. It's a good idea. It's a really good idea. If you want to put one in, you got to take two out. The detail, of course, is critically important. What does it mean and what are the timelines? But the philosophy of it, to try and try to reduce the administrative burden on businesses, especially the ones that can't afford huge numbers of lawyers or accountants and all the other people who make the machine work. Yeah. And now we have a similar approach, but it's not as aggressive. And I think this whole idea has given a big shot of energy to the idea.
And how do you avoid a race to the bottom in those kinds of negotiations? Not just cutting regulation so that you totally deregulate, but to make sure the regulations are smarter, not just and lower compliance burden without lowering public safety.
Yeah, it's just the race to the bottom idea is just flip it upside down. You know, how do you encourage people to the race to the top? The top being whoever's got the most the most number of regulations that have been thrown out the window because they're no longer logical or they can be wrapped up some other way. Start to reward success. Because otherwise you'll create action teams of bureaucrats to cut regulations who will write a manual and circulate around town and set up committees, and the next thing you know, you've got more regulations than you've just gotten rid of. I've been in government before, so
You get the lingo.
Yeah. I think it's time for some questions.
Yeah, definitely. I'm killing time with questions, but they pay me to talk. Sir.
Carlos Nasseray. I'm a student at SAIS Canadian. Do you foresee any risks to Canada's trade competitiveness as a result of the new Canadian carbon tax?
Good question.
No. And let me unpack that for you. One of the basic premises of the way that we think as members of the government is that the environment and the economy go hand in glove. And over the course of the last 10 months or so, a whole bunch of really good work has been done to try and move what is an incredibly valuable export for Canada to tidewater, oil. At the same time, we have some very strongly held beliefs about the environment. And so in part, it's trying to achieve the conditions, a moderated approach to achieve the conditions of a social license to allow local communities and our magnificent indigenous groups who have a right of veto in many cases over the lines where the proposed pipelines might go, and the environmental conditions as it traverses their land, to embrace the idea that everyone will share in the benefits, but it has to be underpinned by investments in green technology and reductions in the overall carbon footprint elsewhere. So what changed over the last little while to allow the conditions for the Prime Minister Trudeau and his team to get 3, not 1, 3 pipelines approved? Now, of course, one of them was, thank you, approved by President Trump shortly after he was elected, but that's 2 before that. And it was an agreement by the province of Alberta to energetically go after the technologies and the plans to reduce their carbon footprint under Premier Notley. And then, of course, it was getting the Premier of British Columbia on side, as she had to discuss with her constituents the importance and priority that would be given to environmental protection as those pipelines crossed a whole bunch of pristine territories. And at the same time, a long-standing issue was, because it's mainly on the West Coast, was there wasn't sufficient technologies or people or resources to help mitigate a spill. And so over $1 billion was been recently allocated to sort of emergency responders and all that kind of effort. Long-winded answer to say that I think we are going to be further ahead 10 or 15 years from now as the world's dependency on hydrocarbons naturally starts to diminish. Because eventually it's going to be a long time after I'm gone. But you can see the stock starting to be consumed. And we're going to find alternative sources of energy, and we want to be right there, literally at the cutting edge, so that people are buying stuff stamped made in Canada or made under license in the United States.
How, in that regard, I mean, we've long had Canada's had a regional energy relationship, selling more electricity, gas, uranium, oil to the United States, but not so much to other countries. Now, electricity is hard to move, but so much of your exports were really aimed at the U.S. You were our largest energy supplier abroad. But now, because of shifts in the U.S. market, we're demanding less. Does that push Canada to become a more global energy player?
You are still consuming about 93% of our exportable product. What has happened is, of course, our demands have increased as well as we're getting more efficient and effective. But we have not yet essentially plateaued in terms of our carbon footprint, which is why we're being so aggressive about it now. I'm talking about the last 10 or 12 years. We are actively pursuing other potential markets. You have the fracking technology has resulted in, for good or bad, has resulted in a lot of productivity in fields that now were in the past would have been considered dormant. And we've had teams over the last while led by ministers in probably 8 or 9 different countries looking for diversification of markets. And that's natural, by the way. That's a cycle that we always do. We always got people overseas trying to figure out if we can provide stuff to other people. Agrarian products in the main as well, because there's a lot of nations that really value the integrity of the supply chain in agricultural products. Does it come from clean water on land that is not contaminated with rigorous standards of cleanliness and all the rest of that? And by the way, as a former soldier, I can't believe I'm talking about this stuff.
3 questions in the back. If we can go, Michael, Peter, and then just keep going that direction.
That's Michael, right?
Yes.
That's Michael. Okay.
On the subject of cross-border energy trade and social license, Keystone XL is back in use.
Yes.
Do you think that it has social license to proceed?
I wouldn't presume to judge the mood or the moment of the various communities which the pipeline will eventually cross. At the national levels and at the provincial levels, it has a significant degree of acceptance, of understanding its value. Your economy, well, I'm not yours because you're Canadian, but the American economy, we believe, is entering into another uptick cycle. We think good things are going to happen. And to do that, you're going to need energy. And until such time as we can develop the technologies and get to less pollutants, then we got to do what we got to do now with the resources that we have. And we cannot and will not accept the fact that literally hundreds of thousands of people will be unemployed. It's a long-winded way of me trying to explain the context of my answer, which is, in the main, yes, but there will almost certainly be outlier communities who will vigorously protest, as is their right. They will take the various governments to court, and we will talk to them in court, and we'll just see where it goes. Peter.
Peter, a former student from Edmonton. In terms of energy and NAFTA, essentially the increase in shale oil production in the United States and the decrease in net oil imports to the United States, is there some sort of a perception that this has maybe weakened Canada's position in the negotiating parts of NAFTA, as in its trump card in terms of energy security?
No pun intended, I think, there.
Glad to hear you're from Edmonton, by the way. I was a brigade commander out in Edmonton. Had a lot of fun there. Magnificent community. Do you know that Canada imports a lot of oil? About 30% of our oil comes from which country? Yeah, United States. Why? Because a whole bunch of the pipelines go north-south. Market efficiency, integrated economies. It's actually a really good example of it. But not necessarily east-west. So we've got a whole bunch of stuff on our west that goes right down to you in the south, you being Americans, and on the other coast, it goes the other way. So our markets are so closely intertwined that it's not really a question of, do we see our energy, our hydrocarbons, sales to the United States reducing? I don't think we do. Where they come from, though, as more, especially lateral pipelines get built, might well evolve, now I'm projecting here, might well evolve into, in a much more simple model as compared to electricity or electrical grids. The TV cameras and the lights, where does that power come from? Does anybody know? We're not sure right now because there's shunts and systems at work and there's committees that sort this out, but it could well come from Quebec. We don't know. The systems themselves are operating at peak efficiency for the technologies and the markets that currently exist. They're so closely integrated, you can't differentiate. You can't track it. Now, there's people who can, I can't. Much the same is true of our future together in terms of hydrocarbons. I don't think it's going to change much. Ma'am.
I'm Amy Porges from Washington, a trade lawyer. And the question is, can you talk about Canada's plans to implement the TPP to just move ahead, even though the U.S. has dropped off? Also, can you talk about plans to incorporate bits of the TPP in the renegotiated NAFTA?
We believe in trade. We believe in multilateralism. We respect the decision of the United States to withdraw from TPP. We understand the philosophy of the preference of the president and his team of going for bilateral. Got it. We are working with any potential trade partners, and as a matter of fact, we are sometime over the next month or so gathering a bunch of trade ministers in Ottawa, or their equivalent, trade experts, to see how we can get more efficient and more effective in our international approach. We recently signed, through some very good work done by the various ministers and their teams, comprehensive trade agreement with Europe. Still, it's wending its way through the European Union approval process, but long story short, TPP as it is, once the United States withdrew, is almost moot, but there's still the energy and the enthusiasm to do trade more efficiently and more effectively, and that energy has not gone away. And I forgot the second part of the question.
Incorporation of pieces of the TPP and the renegotiated NAFTA, for instance, the digital agenda,
Yeah, okay, got it.
enterprise chapter, other valuable stuff, trade facilitation, modernized customs provisions.
I think it's, yep, I think, as I already mentioned, 11 times now NAFTA's been looked at, and of course, as you're well aware. Every time new things have been introduced because technology has made them commercially viable or commercially important, and you need that regulatory mechanisms. Canada has a list, and you'll forgive me if I don't go over it in public, because the negotiations themselves have not started. And the process is, of course, the White House has to send to the Hill the warning notice, 90 days. And after that, there's a period of, during that period, there's consultation by the Americans with their industries. And after that, negotiations start, and we're going to keep our powder a little bit dry. We'll stay calm and carry on.
Dry powder here, but let me ask you, related to that question, how important do you think Asian markets are for both of us going into the 21st century now?
The emerging markets, well, their growth rates are staggering. Mm-hmm. Some of them are 10, 16, 18%. Serious questions about the overall global impact on the environment. But we're all after emerging markets. I mean, the United States is an exporting nation. You are a trading nation. You have grown wealthy and well-educated and a remarkable country, in part on the viability of your industrial mechanisms and your production capacity and your business sense, but you got to back it up with stuff that you sell. And if you just sell here internal to the United States, the money's just circulating around amongst yourselves. The growth rates that you're trying to achieve won't be there.
Absolutely. Alex, the gentleman in the back, and then Jamie. Oh, do you want to go to Jamie first? He's such a nice person.
Well,
you can take him first if you like.
But his university beat my university all the time in hockey, so I'm not sure.
Well, I appreciate that you don't bear a grudge. Why don't we let him ask a question? We'll come to Alex and then go back.
My question is, what's the government's position on the asylum seekers crossing the border between the border points? I understand there's a treaty in effect for the border points, but not between those. What's the government's position on that?
We're going to maintain that treaty as it is, and we've had an uptick in the number of people who have illegally crossed the border. The good news is that we have our border forces augmented by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who are there to greet them when they arrive. And usually it's a bit of a hike for them. So they're usually tired, wet, cold, and hungry. If it's during the winter, then we got to get them warm right away. And while we're getting them warm, we do our due diligence in terms of who are you? Let's take your picture. Do you have any ID? If they are illegally in the United States, and if they are not qualified for asylum, we treat them with respect and dignity, and we send them back to their country of origin. Yeah. And it's gotten to be quite a routine. Quite a routine. And we inform, the respective authorities as part of the border action teams what's going on. So the numbers are up, but they're not as high as they were, say, 9 or 10 years ago. I can get you specific data on that. We've got some somewhere. The biggest uptick, I say, was 9 or 10 years ago. So far they're within, let me put this in context. The border services have not asked for a huge amount of additional resources to handle this trickle.
Mm-hmm. Alex, and then gentleman in the back.
Alex Bennett from the Canadian Press. So over the last couple of weeks, we've heard contrasting, some would say conflicting, opinions from the American administration on its basic priorities when it comes to the renegotiation of NAFTA. On the one hand, we've heard Wilbur Ross indicate that they'd like to see something very thorough. They're talking about rules of origin vehicles, a new digital chapter, dairy, lumber, pharmaceuticals. On the other hand, they're also saying, well, we got to do this quickly because the Mexican election's coming next year, and let's wrap this up in 8 months. Can you do something thorough before the Mexican elections? That's the first part of my question. Can you have a thorough renegotiation before the Mexican election happens? Second of all, what's the priority for your country, for our country, and for the administration? Would you rather have a thorough deal or a quick deal?
We want a good deal, a deal that benefits all the parties to the maximum extent possible. And by the way, all of those who are business people, you know better than I, that a deal that benefits both or all three of the negotiators is the best one of all. Key point, we're not asking to redo NAFTA. Now, we have some ideas. We have a list, of course. It's been renegotiated 11 times. We're waiting to see that which is proposed. And our philosophy, as mentioned, has been to reach out to our friends, make new ones, try to figure out exactly what's going on, gather our facts, stay calm, and wait. We're waiting to see that which your wonderful country might wish to do vis-a-vis NAFTA. And that will happen in due course. But the first step, of course, is for the White House to send the notice to the Hill, which will trigger that 90-day discussion period, consultative process. Then the negotiations start. So you have quite rightly asked me, what are we hoping to get out of this? And I am quite rightly ducking and bobbing and weaving, because I have no intention of telling you, because we don't want to unmask it this time.
But it does sound like you're in favor of a good deal for all sides, more than maybe just a quick deal.
It depends on the complexity. Once you start the process, there's an argument to be made that it's probably worthwhile to figure through what all the partners might want. But the person right now, or the organizations right now, which are driving the current discussions, is the government of the United States. So we look forward to seeing what exactly it is that they wish to renegotiate.
Fair enough. Gentleman in the back. Back to you.
Taking my question.
Yes, sir.
Jordan Sells, I'm a student at Howard University. Recently, the U.S. withdrew its commitment to occupy Wall Street. And basically what happened is that they were talking about this insider trading going on in the stock market. So a lot of economists are trying to do some really good social science work and say, politics and economics go together. How are they going to solve that problem in the Trump administration? And what do you think we could do as the public to support that type of insider trading and make sure that when we go up for votes on Capitol Hill, we still have that kind of alliance that we need from the public to support the administration's agenda?
Financial markets, tricky.
That sort of slightly puzzled look on my face is that of a soldier who's just received a question which is far more complicated than he's been trained to answer. So I understand, I think, the basic premise of your question, but I literally can't answer it. It's not because I don't want to, I just haven't thought about it, and I don't want to make a mistake and mislead you. So, do you have another one?
Oh, no, the question is about the economy. So
Yeah.
it's really helpful.
I'm so sorry. Okay.
Just before I come back to you, can I go to Dwight?
Dwight Mason, at one time American DC in Ottawa. Tell me, you mentioned NORAD.
Yes.
What future do you see for it? And in the current context of North Korea, is Canada considering reconsidering missile defense?
Our basic position on missile defense has not changed. But there are new emerging threats. There always are. And it would be wrong for any government to ignore them, because the primordial duty of any government is to try and keep its citizens safe, as you know so well, because you've lived this life. NORAD is at an interesting crossroads. Does it stay that which it is now, in the main awareness, warning, and dealing with an air-breathing threat? Or does it incorporate discrete elements of cyber, of space, to enhance its surveillance role? Does it get new capabilities to look, not only from the ground up, but across from the bottom of the sea up and down? And what is its role in the integration between high-speed threats, either launched at low level, or the big ones that come up over the top, and you need a ballistic missile defense to deal with them? My opinion is I think NORAD will be around for a great many years. It may not necessarily be uniquely focused, which it's not now, on the overwhelming nuclear strike capability of potential enemies. But I see its role continuing as a surveillance architecture and as an integrator of potential combat power. I think it's going to be around well into the next 50 or 60 years.
Continue tracking Santa as well.
That's a key role.
That's a very
Because
important role.
he comes over to the North Pole, and of course then we have a big argument, is that Canadian sovereignty? And
As long as you have F-18s escorting.
oh, good one. We do.
Ms. Porges, can we give you the last question?
Sure. Okay, I have one more question about NAFTA, which I think you might be actually able to answer. So Mexico, I think starting even back in like January, Mexico, since very early this year, the Mexican government has they launched a pre-preparation process for renegotiating NAFTA. They launched a consultation process with their domestic stakeholders and domestic governments. They've been really, really preparing and thinking hard about their priorities. What's going on in Canada? Is Canada doing the same sort of thing? Can you talk about the Canadian process, the Canadian process of consultation with the provinces, consultation with stakeholders, consultation with domestic interests? Because I think this is very much of interest to the business community here. There are probably issues on which the business community here and the business community in Canada really see the same, have very unified views. And they could benefit from reaching out to each other. But it would be helpful to know how the Canadian process works so that business can reach out to their counterparts in Canada and feed that input into the process north of the border as well.
At the highest levels, the process involved reorganization inside the Prime Minister's office to create a dedicated team to initiate, track, report, collate all the exchanges. The same thing happened in our Department of Foreign Affairs, Global Affairs. The augmentation to the capabilities here of the Canadian Embassy in Washington. In terms of the discussions with the stakeholders, in other words, the business owners and the manufacturers associations, I have some responsibility in that. But myself or the Minister of Trade and the total team have probably had discussions in the multiple hundreds with individual businesses, groups of businesses, associations, workers' associations, unions, and the list go on, multiple hundreds, which in turn has been reinforced by the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, the Council of Chief Executives. A variety of advisory teams have been set up inside Global Affairs, and the Minister of Finance, Minister of Foreign Trade, in a variety of broad themes, be it innovation, be it infrastructure, be it natural resources. And we are actively encouraging our national level associations, for example, automobile manufacturing associations, to maintain, and if they don't have it, to reestablish a close dialogue with their American counterparts so we can get sort of truth. So you have to think of it, it's not a military campaign. You have to think of it as a well-synchronized, well-organized tableau of who's talking to who, what message are they trying to put across, what results of the discussion have ensued, are they supporting or not supporting, and how can we try and help them arrive at a suitable decision. Been busy.
Very busy. Mr. Leslie, I think many people here will know you from your military career as someone who stood up for Canadian national interests, who stood up for Canadian values and protecting Canadians in the field, but also American counterparts, as you said in your speech. What we've seen here today is that you're continuing the work out of uniform. You're doing great work for both of our countries in trying to find sensible middle paths so that we can work together and keep the Canada-US relationship strong. That's exactly the spirit that Tom Enders had when he was ambassador. It's exactly the spirit we have here at Johns Hopkins SAIS, and I thank you for renewing our faith that the future is going to be a good one, especially if you're in charge.
Wow. I'm not in charge, but thank you, Professor. It's very kind.
And there is a good future for all of us. Lunch is next door.
Ah.
Feel free to grab one. Thank you very much, and thank you very much. That was good.